This episode is brought to you by Istruzi Golf. Hey coach, I've got another data point you're going to want to hear. This time we are talking about your impact on membership renewal rates at hybrid or private clubs. Here's the stat brought to you by Istruzi. According to the PGA of America, players who get lessons and belong to private or hybrid membership clubs are virtually guaranteed to renew their membership. Keep listening to hear the exact data points. You're going to like them. This episode is brought to you by Smart2Move Golf. Currently, force plates and ground reaction forces are the most talked about topic in golf instruction. With the recent release of their completely wireless and portable 3D dual force plates, Smart2Move has made this technology more accessible, functional, and affordable than ever before. Whether indoors or outdoors, coaches can quickly connect via S2M iPad app to view 3D ground reaction forces, multi-camera video analysis, kinematic body tracking, TrackMan integration, and pressure distribution, amongst other features. Force plates allow instructors to measure how a golfer is using the ground to create their unique movement patterns, club delivery, and power. With this information, you can quickly help golfers improve and elevate any instruction that you offer. Smart2Move also offers industry-leading educational content from experts such as Dr. Tyler Standifird, which is on the show, and Jason Zubak, long drive champion, to ensure all golf instructors and fitness or medical professionals fully understand practical application of force plate data. I've been using the plates for almost a year now, and I can attest to the ease of use and the valuable insight and data information I'm getting that's really, really applicable to all my lessons, and it's helping all my players to club delivery, to adding speed, to really just being able to measure so many aspects of how they're using the ground. So I highly recommend this product, and so happy to have them on board as a sponsor of the Golf Guru Show. Now let's get to this week's episode.
It's not what you know, it's what you can prove.
You know how to cut to the core of me, Baxter. You're so wise. But like a miniature Buddha covered in hair.
I want to become a guru so girls will like me. Then I will like myself.
Now, before we do this, let's go over the ground rules. Rule number 1. No touching of the hair or face.
Of course.
And that's it! Now let's do this!
Are you not entertained? Are you not entertained? Is this not why you are here?
What's up, everybody? I'm back with another amazing interview, and welcome to another episode of the Golf Guru Show. I'm your host, Jason Sutton, and I am the Guru. I'm also the Director of Instruction at the beautiful Colleton River Club in Bluffton, South Carolina, where it is my mission to break down high performers in the teaching and coaching business in all fields of study, unpack and tease out what makes them great and successful, from daily habits, their continuous growth journey, to how they help and train their players and their students. Make sure you download this episode and hit that purple subscribe button so you don't miss out on any future episodes that will be coming your way. All I ask is that you share this podcast on social or with your friends, with other coaches and players that might benefit from the information. I am so excited for this one, as my guest is Dr. Tyler Standifird. Dr. Standifird is a golf biomechanics professor at Utah Valley University. His journey in golf research and biomechanics started a few years ago with consulting with companies like Super Speed Golf, and now works for Smart2Move Dual force plates, which is our topic of discussion on this episode. Suppose you ever thought that measuring and studying ground reaction forces was not important. In that case, I think this conversation will definitely sway your opinion as we go deep into the forces and torques we create in the golf swing using the ground and how to measure them. Dr. Tyler gives a detailed description of each of the important parts of each of these forces and torques with some great drills and application to go along with it so we coaches can help our players improve. This was such an insightful conversation, and I thoroughly enjoyed and learned a lot from it. I encourage you to also check out the video version of this conversation on my YouTube channel for some extra visual references if it doesn't come through the audio. So let's get to my conversation with the brilliant and talented Dr. Tyler Standifird. Enjoy. All right, Dr. Tyler Standifird, welcome to the show.
Good to hang out for a little bit, Jason. Excited to chat.
Yeah, I appreciate you coming on, taking the time. I first saw you last year at Open Forum when you did your talk, and that was prior to me getting more involved with Smart2Move. So I was going to have you on regardless because I was super impressed with your information. And so it's really cool to finally sort of meet you and catch up. So this is going to be fun.
Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to it. Yeah, that's such a great event. That was my first time actually at Open Forum. So that was kind of the baptism by fire, right? Like throw me up on stage, my first time ever there. But so many bright minds in those rooms, so much to learn and share. And yeah, it's such a great event.
Yeah, I've been there from the beginning. We started in a bar at one of the small like Muni there in Orlando, and it's grown to be, I think, probably one of the biggest teaching summits in the country now. So yeah it's awesome. Pretty cool. All right, so let's start before we get into the cool stuff and the geeky stuff that we're going to talk about, which I'm really excited to hear about, and I know the listeners are as well. Let's get into your backstory a little bit for people that don't know kind of where you came from and how you got to where you are now. Give us a little lineage of where did this all begin?
Yeah, I mean, I would say like the beginning, right, would have had to have been just as an avid golfer, became obsessed with golf as a young child. So my dad played college golf one year and put golf clubs in all the hands of his boys. And we have a family trophy that we pass around, to the current winner, which I will say we played last week, Jason, and I came out victorious against my brothers.
Nice.
And honestly, educationally, I ended up kind of pursuing a degree to become a doctor and just wasn't really excited about that field, and ended up as a senior in college. Like, what am I going to do? I'm going to graduate with a degree in exercise science, and I have no clue what I'm doing. I went to the University of Utah in Salt Lake City, and I ended up taking a biomechanics class my senior year with a professor who literally made one comment that changed the trajectory of my life forever. And I'm going to give you the comment exactly as it came out of his mouth, which was this: if I had any interest in the game of golf, I could be a rich man. And that was it. And I walked up to him after class and I said, hey, I am an obsessive golfer and I love biomechanics. I said, what did you mean by that comment? And he said this. He said, Tyler, if you know golf, you know how stupid golfers are. They will pay any amount of money to get 1% better at their skill. And he said, so much of it is related to biomechanics and the principles of biomechanics. He said, so if you can understand biomechanics and know golf, like you could do so many cool things in the world of golf. And so that was literally the moment where I said, I'm going to go get a PhD in biomechanics. So I TA'd for him one semester, got a master's degree, got a PhD, spent most of my time researching like orthopedic biomechanics, meaning I was working with old people walking up and down stairs. And it wasn't until probably the last 4 years here at my current university that I've been able to build up a golf lab and apply those same principles, right? It's all about human movement and force and motion. I just got to pivot from a clinical population to, again, all those dumb golfers who just want to get better and are willing to uncover any rock to do it, right?
Yeah, so Utah Valley University, is that correct?
Yeah, so I've been a professor here, for 9 years. And, what's cool about my university here is they really pride themselves on student experiences for research. And not shockingly, students love to research athletes.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
And so I do a lot with our sports teams, and really their philosophy is if you're getting students engaged, we'll give you the equipment to do that. And so I started with a TrackMan, went to some golf-specific motion capture systems, now kind of a full simulator, and now like a Quintic, a full big tilt from Well Putt. I've got a pretty sweet lab space now.
Yeah, I've seen some videos and pictures from your lab, and I've got a lot of questions about that. So that was kind of the introduction to golf. Like you basically just got full reign of like, okay, let's start testing players and spend time with like the golf team. I know you've done some stuff with the golf teams there. Was that the introduction to golf?
It's interesting. My very first was with some work I did with Super Speed Golf. I just reached out to them because their product popped up and said, hey, this is what I do. It might be cool to play around with your product. And so they sent me some. And that was my first research study, was just looking at what happens biomechanically to golfers if they speed train, what happens to their force and motion. And then that just kind of started. They gave me some other opportunities to do some things, introduced me to people. It's funny though, Jason, like the golf team, I was doing this stuff for probably 3 years before the men's golf coach came knocking on my door one day, and he's like, do you want to like work with the golf team a little bit? And I said, yeah, I'd love to. And so now it's a little bit kind of, we do research studies. We're finishing up one right now with some students on grip size and grip strength and kinematic and kinetic variables in the golf swing. And then, like tomorrow, I'm working with one of our women's golfers, trying to help her with some force things that we're working on with her and her coach, and just a little bit of everything.
That's so cool. Yeah, then that was actually on my list because I know we're going to talk about ground reaction forces and all of that stuff, but I'm curious about the other research projects that you're doing, because I know you've done some stuff with putting, and I'm kind of a big putting guy. And so can you briefly describe that research project and maybe some of the other ones and maybe some of the things that you've gleaned from that?
Yeah, for sure. It's funny, literally, like I'm actively texting this second with a group who just finished up the study on the grip strength. We're pulling all that data right now. And preliminary, what it was is that we just tend to find that the faster players, the better players, just tend to have more isometric grip strength, right? If you
makes sense.
Measure them on a dynamometer, they can squeeze harder. And so while they might say things like, I feel like I'm squeezing a 5 or a 6 out of 7, well, their 5 or 6 out of a 7 might be very different than the 5 or 6 out of a 7 of a 55-year-old golfer whose grip strength is 50% what that professional's is. So I started one study where I had like about 101 amateur golfers out at a golf tournament, TrackMan, grip strength, and saw some correlations to grip strength and club speed, which made me want to start to uncover this a little bit more. So the current study is kind of a fun one where we have 5 different driver conditions where it's 2 grip sizes. So a standard grip and then like a mid-size plus 2 wrap. So something big enough, but not so big. Like we weren't going like Jumbo Max style just for comfort. But then we matched the club for swing weight, overall weight, head weight, those kind of things, just to see what happens to, again, all the TrackMan variables for sure, and then all the ground reaction forces and kinematics as well. But then as a flip to that too, again, my hypothesis is that some of those things are really going to be dependent upon people's static grip strength. So we just went ahead and measured everyone's static grip strength anyway, so that we could use that in the analysis. And so that's one that like they're putting in a little thing for the end of this project in class, and then I'll go in there and start harvesting all of the data and see what we see there. So
that's so cool, because the nerd in me, because I've done a few research, I'm not a scientist, but on putting and like acceleration rates using Sam Putt Lab, and we put a bunch of PGM kids through that and sort of tested them. So I'm curious of like, what would you think, or sort of how do you put together a study? Like I'm trying to think of the words here, but the level of players, does that matter? You know what I'm saying? Like, how do you put that together, and what do you consider like, okay, we've got quality data with the people that we're testing, and we can sort of learn something from that?
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned kind of the putting thing. I did a putting study as well, just looking at different grip styles. So not like an actual grip on it. I did some collaborations with Garson putting grips where we're looking at some of their ones that really open up the forearms into kind of this big supinated position. And again, it's the same process. Like for me, my research always starts with like just a practical question where I'm like, oh, I put some bigger grips on my club and I think I hit the ball a little better. So cool, let's dive into it. And you bring up a good point where there's this kind of fine line between golfers who are consistent enough to get good data versus like the guys who this might be really meaningful, who might be your 12 to 15 handicaps who aren't as consistent as you might like. So my range tends to be, again, I'll go all the way down to plus handicaps. I'm fine with that. On the high end, I typically try and keep people at least under like a 20 to ish handicap just for consistency purposes. Most research in golf data sets say that, and again, we could for sure debate this, but they would say, maybe 7 to 10 swings tends to be at least somewhat representative. The hard part, Jason, is like, while I'd love to do 50 swings, if I've got 5 conditions, I can't have a golfer do 250 swings.
Right. Yeah. Fatigue comes into play, and the environment, exactly. Right? Like there's so many variables. That's why I'm asking, because we did the study and they were all pretty good players. Obviously, they were all PGM kids, and just tested them on how their ability to for touch, right? And then to see like which acceleration profiles sort of perform the best. And we came out with some cool data, but at the end, you're just sort of scratching your head going, I'm not really sure I learned anything, I kind of like this, it's the environment of like how fast was the putting green, how the carpet or whatever. I was just kind of curious of like what you thought would actually.
Well, and I'll say too, Jason, like you say you're not a researcher, but that comment right there to me is the ultimate researcher, which is every research question answers one and uncovers 15 more. What we started to do, and I worked with, this is a guy at Callaway, the PhD in biomechanics, a guy that I became friends with. Him and I talked about it quite a bit. And some of the things we start to do with the variability of the data, especially when you get into the higher swing numbers, is like, well, if we can get kind of an average and then build like a data set of like 1 to 2 standard deviations. Now, if in those 10 swings, we have 2 that are outside of the 2 standard deviations, whether for good or for bad, let's just dismiss those and zero in on the 8 that were within probably a normal. So we tend to do that where, again, a better player, obviously they're going to have maybe a little bit of a tighter cluster of that. But ultimately what we're trying to get rid of is that the sky ball of the 25 handicap, equally probably the 8 handicap who just flushes the ball perfectly, trying to find a good representation. And again, I wish I could just do 1 or 2 condition studies where everyone's hitting 30 balls. It's just, you want to do more, right?
Yeah, it's tough. I'm not saying we didn't learn anything because like you said, it's almost you learn what doesn't work, right? Yeah. It's like, and that's sort of how we teach is, we don't teach on tour averages or, because there's no absolutes really in golf, especially when it comes to putting. There's so many variables. Yeah. But yeah, it was a cool study and we were kind of left scratching our heads going, all right, well, at least you have a starting point of like, okay, we know this isn't good. And then you start measuring, like you said, like you need tour players or better players. And you're like, oh, you start to see patterns, right? So that's kind of, I don't know.
Well, and Pat, it's funny. So I'm starting to get into putting more. So we're going to need to connect and chat because I'll have the ability in my putting green with the well putt system with the tilts to sync the force plates into it, the Smart2Move portable plates in there. And I have a Quintic, but again, we're all getting similar-ish data. But
that's just ball roll, though, right? I mean, that's like that. You're not getting.
That has markers on the face as well.
Oh, okay. Okay, it's updated then.
Yeah, you put markers on the face, and then there's some dots on the ball. So you actually get face variables and ball variables. I obviously want to pair it with the ground reaction force variables too. And like what I've started to do a little bit right now, just with our college players, is like, again, when they get a ball started on a line that they were aiming for, I have started to just like let them self-classify some things, right? Like, it felt like a good putt to me. It started on the line I wanted, at a speed I wanted. Cool, let's put it in this folder. That one didn't. Let's put it in this folder. And just start kind of subdividing themselves. And putting is cool because they could stand there and hit 75 putts.
Right.
And you could get, again, as long as you can handle that much data and separate the two and then start to look at those relationships. But I would love to add force to it as well.
Yeah, I did a bunch of stuff I used to use Body Track as well. Kind of, that was my, when that was like the only thing available, right? 10 years ago or whatever, longer, before Swing Cat came out and then Smart2Move. So I used to put my players on the mat when they would putt. And it was interesting to see, thrust and sway and how their points of contact were with their feet. I mean, there's just a lot of things that were interesting to kind of, like I said, try to not leave any stone unturned when you're doing that. But that's cool, man. So how did you connect with Smart2Move? Because I know I'm sure you've had a lot of opportunities to go with a lot of companies. I know you get pitched by a lot of companies and get your brain picked by other people. So talk about that story.
Yeah, so some of it started just with some of the collaborations with Superspeed and Smart2Move. They had some good relationships, and I did a few webinars. I think the first one we did was one in China that we did there with Gregory and Jean Paul from Smart2Move. And it just, again, as I got to have some times to meet with Jean Paul and Gregory, see how they were kind of attacking and collecting data and those kind of things, I think we jived really well together. Ground reaction force has always been kind of my number one passion. Even when I was analyzing our wrestlers, our basketball players, our volleyball players, it was always centered around how do they produce force. One of my favorite studies I did, Jason, was actually one that looked at ground reaction force production as it relates to sleep, quality and quantity of sleep.
Okay.
And so
that's
we would
different.
bring in our athletes, we would just give them a sleep survey, assess their sleep, put them on the force plates, and then they would come in multiple times, and we would just start kind of looking at what does quality and quantity of sleep do with ground reaction force. And, and of course, not shockingly, you would say, yeah, of course it influences it. But it's just like ground reaction forces, it's where I feel like I had the most experience. And then again, as an educator, my full-time job, right, Jason, is teaching these principles to undergraduate students who it's their first time taking a biomechanics class. They don't like math. They're scared of some of the terms. And so I feel really fortunate that over, 9 years of teaching it, you start to learn how to communicate it in ways that are a little bit easier to digest. And what ended up happening is, Gregory at a PGA show, I think it would have been the 2023 PGA show, sat down with me and said, hey, we want to build some more education content. We want to focus on the U.S., and we think you'd be a great fit to help us do that. And that kind of started the ball rolling. And now I'm almost, 2 years in with them. And I feel like it's kind of the ride's just getting started. So it's been a lot of fun.
100%. Yeah. And I got the plates earlier this spring. So I'm kind of like 5-6 months into it. And like I said, I've understood the majority of teaching, using the ground but it's being able to measure. And I think Smart2Move is, the best I've ever experienced as far as just ease of use, right? The graphs are not difficult to decipher. And then I was just on a podcast a couple nights ago as a guest, and I was talking about it. And even for club golfers and average golfers, it's so valuable to be able to show them in that sort of biofeedback mode of how, like you said, just standing on the plate. Where are you at? Where do you feel like you are, and where are you?
My goodness, my last two analyses, I used just this live mode at setup. I was trying to get players to be a little bit more active, a little bit more engaged at setup. And it's like the fact that I can just say, hey, set up, okay, see this graph right here, see those two lines, feel that position of that drill we just did. And they watch those two lines separate. And they're like, oh, what does that mean? I'm like, that meant you're doing it, right? And that's it, right? You're here, it went here, and you're right. It's the biofeedback, the ease of use, the ease of communication. It's great data, it's informative data, but the way that it's presented, I think for the coach and the player, allows there to be such seamless communication between the two, where then you can actually, help them achieve some of the things you're trying to work with them on, right?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and your content is fantastic. I've looked at the certifications. I've watched all the videos just to have a better understanding of just the little nuances of how the software works. And getting Zoo back in there is a nice touch. I met him at the PGA show last year. He was a beauty.
I think that's kind of what has been really fun for me, honestly, Jason, is, again, 4 years ago I started in this journey of golf biomechanics. And now it's these names that I've read about and looked up to and seen, here I am in a video with Jason Zubak.
Right.
Thinking, what the heck am I doing in this video with Jason Zubak? And, why is he texting me? It's such, and I think this is what I'm seeing in the world of golf, at least for the most part, right? Is just so much. I think so many people we're trying to get to the same thing. All of us have that goal of helping golfers have more fun and get better at the game of golf. We all might take a little different approach on how we do it, or use a different tool or measurement tool. Again, in the force plate world, I actually know Scott Lynn super well. Interviewed at Cal State Fullerton where he's at, and we have a great relationship. And both of us love ground reaction forces, and we use two different tools to do it. But man, we're both trying to help golfers create better force, better motion. And I think it's fun. It's so much fun.
Yeah, Scott's been on the show, and I've been friends with him. Great guy, super smart. Yeah, you missed the 10, 15 years of the wars and the Facebook forums, and you're getting into a little kinder, gentler golf industry a little bit. I mean, there's obviously still some arguing and debating going on, which is healthy. I think is good. Yeah, but you're right. We're just trying to all help our players and get the most accurate information that we can, and then how do we apply it, right? It's anytime, and we're going to get right into it here in a second, I promise, but when something new comes out, obviously ground reaction forces aren't new, but as far as measuring devices and technology, the first thing we're asking as coaches is how do we explain that information to the average golfer or the club player or, our students to where they can understand it. And I think Smart2Move does an incredible job of that. So let's get into it. It's like, I'm just going to cue you up and kind of let you cook. But
Sounds good.
Yeah, so, talk about the three forces or the things that Smart2Move measures. And then I've got tons of questions on some of the things that you've talked about in your videos and in your content. So yeah, I'll just let you go with that.
Yeah, cool. And again, I always like to describe it to golfers in the sense of like there are kind of three things we're doing from a force standpoint. We create force both towards and away from the target. We create force both towards and away from the ball. And we create force kind of up and down. Those are those three forces. Now, forces are creating the linear movements in motion, right, in the direction that you're applying those forces. But the other thing that happens in golf, right, is we have these rotations or these torques. And when we can start to pair up some of these forces with what we'd say is an axis of rotation or something that a body can rotate around or a limb can rotate around, then we can start to also create torques and start to look at how a golfer kind of rotates in the horizontal plane or around a vertical up and down axis. This is like that I'm tucking and I'm spinning, doing my 360s like a figure skater. We can start talking about how someone might move in the frontal plane. So again, I always like to depict this as like, think of like a little kid doing a cartwheel. Again, that's kind of that frontal plane motion or those frontal plane rotations that occur. And then the other way to think about it is actually, and this I'm seeing brought up a little bit more, are the sagittal plane motions. So this is that like, I hate to just boil it down to early extension because I think
flexion extension of the
But again, it's these flexion extension motions, these like kind of tilts away and towards the ball, which I think is a good way to think about it. And again, the way that Smart2Move, the way we kind of approach this educationally is there are some things we can look at in these forces. It's important to think about how big these forces are, so the magnitudes of the forces. And it may not always be that bigger is better, but we tend to want to see, especially for the club golfer, getting them to generate a little bit more force tends to be something that can be really helpful to them. We look at the timings of when these forces occur. And I think that's the biggest one that as I start to kind of dive into my analysis, that's the one where even you get a really high level player in improving the timing of these forces by just a little bit can make a really big difference to them, not just for speed, but I think also for club delivery, impacts, ball flight. So the timing of those forces are really important. Where you're actually pushing on the ground is a big part of it. Training the proper place to send the force in the feet, mainly to give you the best leverage, I think, to produce for those forces and torques that I talked about. And this is one too, Jason, where I would say we tend to, I guess we got to be careful about putting every single golfer in the exact same bubble, right? I think we do need to have some flexibility to know, hey, we might have a golfer. I have a golfer who maybe with their coach, they're trying to create a little bit more of a rotation around an axis that stays a little more centered. And we can work with that, right? We can look at the data and exemplify that. And so those are really big things. And then the last one is the one, Jason, that I think maybe scares my students the most. And I think it tends to maybe scare some of the golf coaches and players the most is when we get into this concept of like the shapes of the curves, the way that they develop force, so rates of force development. And then another big one is impulse.
Yeah, I was going to say impulse is something I'm curious about.
Impulse is a big one where it's not just and that's why I mean like this idea of some golfers are already creating a really beautiful magnitude of the force. But unfortunately, they're like a light switch, just on and off so quickly versus, building to that, hanging on to these large forces and being able to create these larger impulses, larger changes in motion as a result of a force, which I think we understand a lot of, applied over a time, and now we end up with an impulse. And again, my favorite impulse example, Jason, is like if I threw you a water balloon, you're going to catch that water balloon much different than you're going to catch a tennis ball. Because the water balloon, you know that you have to brace the water balloon. And in fact, I'll do this in class where I'll bring a tennis ball and water balloons to class. I'll get a student to stand up in the room and we'll start water balloon tossing back and forth. And we just observe they're trying to cradle that water balloon. They're trying to increase the time of that applied force so that they can slow down the water balloon without this abrupt breaking of the water balloon. And in golf, what we're really trying to do is we're trying to leverage this principle of, well, let's apply that force and let's try and make it pretty good size, well, let's try and lengthen out the time we're applying it so that we can do more with what we want from a motion standpoint, put our bodies and then the club in a better position to be delivered to the ball.
Gotcha. Yeah, and I probably should have prefaced that this podcast is mainly for coaches. So I want you to get as deep in the weeds and as techie as you can. Like, we're not that we don't care about the players, but this is a coach to coach. Like, you're talking to me and about 12 other coaches that are like, all right, we sort of understand the language. I want you to define some of those things, I think, for the players. Like, that was one thing. Impulse, I think, can be very difficult to understand a lot of times. And then maybe like torque, right? And then kind of continue from what we're looking at.
Yeah, I think the best way to describe impulse is with an example in a golf swing, right? Because again, speaking to golf coaches, because when we start talking about, again, the mathematics of impulse is simply force and time. That gives you an impulse. The reason why we care so much about it is because of a biomechanical relationship of impulse is equal to change in momentum or change in the motion of an object. And so that's why we care a lot about it when we want to create these large changes in motion. But when we start looking at impulse and I say, hey, let's apply the force for a longer period of time, you might start thinking, well, why would I want to like stretch out the time of the downswing, for example? Or I want the downswing to be as short as possible so that I can create a lot of speed, a lot of acceleration. And I would say, yes, that's very true in the downswing. In the backswing, that's a place where I'm really diving into a lot of the things that we do with the lateral impulse. So this is that force that's directed both towards and away from the target. And again, even this morning, just working with a player who really struggled creating lateral forces. So what the trail leg has to do really effectively in the backswing is it has to push not just down straight into the ground for that loading, but it needs to push really hard away from the target. Okay, away from the target. That's what we're seeing in the backswing. Because what that does, remember, that's the internal force from the player. The external force is now going to be pointed towards the target. And what that allows a player to do is that allows a player to really load up on that trail side and actually start shifting the body forward earlier in the swing. That player who gets in that position, right, Jason, we've all seen that player in the position where like they kind of get in that bent position of the back, the hip kind of pops out in the backswing. That's that sway position or those kind of poor postured positions. A lot of times that's coming from a player who just aren't producing enough of that force away from the target to actually stop their motion backwards and initiate the motion forward.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's like the opposite of what you would think, right? I mean, it's like how important is that lead side though? Because that's one of the things that I see in good players, and especially setup wise, is they start moving pressure into that lead foot to kind of rebound, to push away, right? So talk a little bit about the importance of that and how that counterbalances.
Yeah, for sure. And what we see with that lead leg is if that lead leg can push towards the target, that's a great way for that player to initiate that load into the trail side, right? To send things to the trail side. What happens with poor players, right, is when they start to use that lead leg to shift things back, they can't stop it. And so we have to understand exactly, and that's a great way to think about it. What we have to remember with that trail leg lateral force is it's first going to break us, and then second, it's going to push us forward towards the target.
Interesting.
Right?
Yeah.
And so that's one where we actually have the ability to just turn on that force for a little bit longer of a time period. What I often see in players, if I'm looking at that lateral force when I have them on the Smart2Move plates, is they'll get that nice shift backwards, right? So the overall force shifts them a little bit back, and then they kind of try and stop it with the trail leg, and then they get to about arm parallel on the backswing, and it's like all of a sudden that foot stops pushing away from the target, and it starts pushing just straight down.
Interesting. Okay.
And as that force drops, then what ends up happening is they get a little bit too away from and off the ball.
Is that when they start rolling? You see that rolling to the outside of the trail foot?
Roll
Okay.
to the outside of the foot. That would be related to kind of the points of application of that force, right? Keeping it in a position where you can leverage that force. So again, some of that might be due to ankle immobility. So of course we'd want to assess that before, but that rolling out, that falling out, because that force drops. And then what's kind of interesting about it is then what happens is they know they have to move forward, right? They know they don't want to hit a ball from that back foot and just throw the arms at it. And so what ends up happening is then they get into their downswing and then they start shifting forward and they like kind of wake up the leg and say, oh, shoot, let's shoot ourselves forward. But by then, it's so late in the motion that they can't leverage and start to utilize that vertical torque or that rotation. They can't leverage the vertical force up and down, and it's a speed killer, it's a consistency killer, it's a low point killer. There's just so many things that start to fall apart with that lateral force. So interestingly enough, again, today, the player that I was working with, we were able to, and Smart2Move has some threshold values. If you've ever been in the software, they kind of say, if we can get a golfer to about this much,
little dotted line.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And the lateral force threshold value tends to be right around 20%. And so the player I was working with this morning, he was sitting in the 11, 12% range. It's like, okay, we'd like to get that bigger. But honestly, what concerned me a little bit more was the fact that his impulse was low because it dropped. And then you actually brought up this, which I thought was interesting. He actually had no negative impulse to shift him back. He didn't actually use the lead leg to shoot him backwards.
Really? Huh.
Right?
Yeah.
And I think the reason why, it's funny, I actually got him in a drill where I put a lot of motion moving him away from the ball or moving away from the target.
So, yeah, I was going to say that. What kind of drill would you give that player? Like a reverse step drill type of situation?
Yeah, I love the reverse step drill.
I do too.
I leveraged, Super Speed just came out with like a force board that allowed me to like prop him up at an angle and kind of shoot him backwards. Again, I was just trying to put momentum away. And it's funny how quickly, he literally like 2 swings into it, he's like, I hate this. I hate this. And I said, perfect. This is the drill you're going to do.
There you go.
Because if you liked it, all we'd be doing is saying, hey, good job. We found a drill that actually does exactly what you're already doing in your swing. So, but he was a player that because he wasn't good at using the trail leg to break, he ended up just not using the lead leg to shift back, right? And so you start to look at the ground reaction force curves, and I think the more you start to look at them, there's some root cause somewhere where I might say to this player, oh, you know what, let's use that lead leg to just kind of get you going back because we know we want to see that in a swing, at least for what he was trying to do with his swing, right, which was he was trying to create more speed. But in reality, the reason why he would never do that is because he wasn't comfortable using the trail leg to break. And so we did some reverse step drills. We did some of these places where we kind of propped him up on a little bit of a slope that pushed him away. It's funny, I first saw this at a biomechanics conference 10 years ago, and it's this concept of assistive versus resistive. And again, it's probably been in the golf world for a long time, but they did it in the context of kids with cerebral palsy. So cerebral palsy kids get really bent. Their knees are bent, their hips are bent. They're like that golfer who's just, everything is low, right? They can't move off. And what a lot of researchers would do is they said, well, let's just assist them in that motion. If they're bad with the motion, let's just pull them up more. Let's just create this pull up. And then one researcher came in and said, what if we pushed them down more?
Yeah, do the opposite. Yeah, that's kind of how I train with bands is like pushing them the opposite direction, making them do the work, right?
Yep. Yeah, the assistive is nice to get a feel. The resistive, like that. So once we got him doing some of the resistive, he's like, man, this is terrible. Again, I hate this.
Yeah.
I hate this. I hate
Sure,
this.
because he's never done
and
it.
then the other thing, too, is that he wasn't very active laterally at setup. And so I will have to say, this is something that I think probably all good golf coaches are stealing things from other coaches that then make sense in their head. So I remember seeing this drill with John Eisman, who's up in Virginia. Other people have probably done this drill, but John is the person that I saw it. And I saw him throw a towel down on a slick ground and create a lot of tension with that towel at setup. Again, whether that started with John or someone else, I'm not sure, but that's where I saw it. And all of a sudden, I'm like, light bulb moment for me, working with the other athletes. I'm like, basketball players set up much more aggressively with the ground. Volleyball players do. Soccer players do. Why don't golfers, right? Why are golfers just lazy? And then they think of the initiation of the use of the ground as the movement of the club. And I think what they need to think about is let's initiate the contact with the ground and then move the club.
There you go. Yep.
And so we did some stuff that way. And what was cool is we did get his lateral force to get up to 20% from the 13 or 14. But equally as important to me was the fact that we were able to grow his impulse by about 15 to 20%.
Oh, wow.
Right? So that was allowing him to create a better quantity motion of that swing. And for him, again, club speed was kind of what he was trying to do. Even working through some of these drills, thinking very technical, we saw about a 2.5 mile per hour jump in club speed just by feeling that lateral working a lot more in the swing. So I become pretty obsessed with that trail lateral, the trail lateral impulse. I just think it kind of sets the platter to let the other forces feast, right?
Yeah, it's definitely, that's something that's changed from a 2D perspective, because for so many years, we just taught with video of that sort of from 1 to 3 movement, where we always thought sway, pelvis sway was bad. I mean, you look at Oberg is like, he's shifting way off the ball with his pelvis. I mean, that's kind of become, now it's like, oh, wow, I don't have to just turn my hips right away, right? AP force doesn't happen that soon. So it's like, I get some of my players which is like push hard into that right side as hard as you can. And then they'll catch, is what I call it, catching. They'll catch that pressure and then start to push up and rotate. And it definitely sets you up for all the speed generation you can do in the downswing. So that's really cool to hear that. Hybrid and private clubs love when members renew. Why? Because it costs 5 times more to acquire or find a new member than it does to retain a current member. Plus, those returning members spend 67% more than new members. So where do you, a golf coach, come into the picture? Well, the PGA of America found that if a member takes lessons, they renew their membership close to 100% of the time. For reference, hybrid or private club memberships retention rates hover between 92 and 94% per year, meaning golf coaches account for 94% of the member renewal success rate. Another powerful stat, the immense value of us golf coaches add back to your golf courses. If knowledge is power, you've just become more knowledgeable. The next step is taking action with this newfound power to create change. Istruzi not only protects, but amplifies the value you create every day to your players and your facility. A bunch of you have already created an account. The download link is in the show notes, or head to Istruzi.com. When you create your account, don't forget to add the asterisk to your last name so they know the guru sent you.
You mentioned something there and you'd mentioned this idea of some of the other terms we talked about with some of the torques and vertical torques. You talked about this AP. I think, again, the AP is kind of a cool one too, where so AP forces are forces towards and away from the ball. Those are the two forces that when we combine them together with the trail leg and the lead leg around this axis of rotation that tends to be up somewhere through the center of our body. Again, it migrates a little bit, but think about it like I'm doing that rotation. When players get really, really like too much AP too early, they tend to just turn forever. And that vertical torque graph stays negative like forever and ever. And again, that's something where I've started to look at. So again, a vertical torque or the negative would be rotation away from the target. Positive would be rotation towards, generally speaking. I've started to look a lot at that impulse value as well. So if we go to kind of where the forces wake up, and again, for most people, it's when the club's kind of moving, and we go all the way to impact, I start comparing the negative impulse to the positive impulse to see, how long are they generating an impulse or a tentative movement of motion away and rotating away from the ball, and then how much quantity do they get going back towards the ball. And man, the very best players, they're stopping that away from the ball much, much sooner than our amateur golfers. Again, I love this on the Smart2Move curve. I'll go to that curve and I'll just watch where it crosses zero. Yeah. I'll just watch where it turns from negative to positive. And again, really good players, I mean, that negative to positive is like arm parallel in the backswing.
It's crazy.
Sometimes it's that early, and our fastest players are there. Maybe a little bit after that still for really good players. But, man, our amateur golfers, it's like because we've been afraid of sway, we've introduced this like forever turn away from the target, which then they have to they end up being so late in the turn that now we get that slapping coming across. And so that's where again, grooving that, you have to have AP. I don't want anyone to say no,
yeah, it's like it depends on the demo, right? Because a lot of my older guys need more, but I understand what you're saying is we get over rotators and it almost costs them speed. They almost got too much deceleration too early, and yeah, it's kind of a rarity. But that's actually a really cool conversation because most people are trying to do it.
Not to mention the torque stuff too. I've worked with a couple of golfers who have some back issues, and again, I'm too early on to say, hey, I've collected 75 golfers with back pain, so here's what I think causes back pain. Man, there's 1,000 things that could cause.
Well, tell me what you think. I'm curious. Come
I'll
on.
just say, the two players I've worked with on our golf teams who complain of back pain, they tend to be people who create a lot of time turning away from the target and create a ton of AP and a ton of vertical torque and a ton of vertical torque impulse in the backswings. Okay. And then they're spending a really long time rotating through, and they tend to be really bad with laterals.
Interesting, because I would have thought it'd been more like side bend, right? Which would be like more lateral stuff.
It's interesting here, and I know we see like we all see the still frame videos of whoever coming into impact and they're this and this and whatnot. But when you start to think about the lumbar vertebrae, right? What the lumbar vertebrae are really good at from an anatomical standpoint is they're really good at flexion and extension, and they're really good at lateral flexions, right? Mm-hmm. What they don't like is they don't like rotation, right? That's coming from the thoracic cage. And so sometimes I start to think like when we get really, really, really overly rotated and maybe our thoracic mobility isn't what it should be, what's happening to those lumbar vertebrae that's maybe creating this turning effect and some things like that. And then especially when you fire back through, again, it's two golfers, but I will say this, men's golfer that I worked with, we just worked on him grooving some of his lateral forces. We wanted to just wake up some laterals. He didn't shift all the way into his trail, the yellow dot on the Smart2Move, which is basically a pressure trace. Mm-hmm. It tended to kind of hover mostly in the middle. He didn't really load really, really effectively in that trail side. We got him a little bit cleaned up in the lateral, got him building a little bit more. And after he finished that day, he just kind of looked at the TrackMan. He's like, Tyler, I just hit 50 drivers and my back feels great.
Wow. So
more
cartwheel.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And there's so much that goes into it. But again, I worked with him a week later and he said, the biggest change I'm seeing is that I feel I can hit more golf balls pain-free.
Interesting.
And really all we did was we introduced a little bit more lateral loading in the backswing. We didn't turn off his AP. We just said, let's sacrifice maybe a little bit of AP in the name of a little bit more lateral and getting that. I think it's more about creating the proper ratio of the two, right? Yeah. But that was kind of an exciting one where I'm thinking, okay, mental note, let's start classifying these people as my two back pain players.
Right.
And start to kind of just building data sets.
Yeah, it's changed definitely the way I look at golf swings for sure, and especially more because I was, always trying to get everybody to rotate, which I want them to have that, but the way they get there, and I've learned a lot of this from, I don't know if you know John Tattersall, done a lot of studies on, it's really, really smart coach, and he's big, they like get him to shift and get him to like push up, and that creates a lot of that AP torque that in the right time, but it's also giving you that unweighting. It's giving you the stuff that's going to actually get them to go left sooner, right? Because, I think you talked about in some of your videos that about P2s when the best players are actually going towards target, right? I mean, I tell people that and they're like, are you kidding me? Like I'm going to have a short backswing, but it doesn't always equate to that, right? It's like it kind of goes up the chain.
Yeah, for sure. And it's you start getting professional players on these plates, fast players on these plates. You show those to like, again, your club golfer as a coach. And it's like, it's mind blowing to them. And maybe our goal isn't always to get them there, but man, if we can move them a little bit earlier, good things are going to happen.
100%. All right. So a couple of terms we've talked about torque. So I want you to explain torque to the listeners. And then also that leads us into moment arm, because that's a term that is sort of it's not new, but I mean, it's kind of in the teaching part of it. I think it's a little bit new, and I think you have a really good explanation for that.
Yeah. So again, in torque, I always start with the mathematical way that we calculate torque, which is two quantities. It's a force and a moment arm, right? The important thing about a torque is if I were to push on something linearly, right, I'm going to create linear motion, right? I just push on it and the thing moves the direction I push. When I want to create rotational motion or things that spin, a door swinging on an axis, a joint moving up and down, in order to do that, I have to create a torque. So I'm still applying that same force, but now instead of applying it through the axis of rotation of that object, I can move it at a distance from the axis of rotation. And that would then introduce what we would call a moment arm. And again, my favorite example of a moment arm is a door, because I think it's so simple and everyone sees it, right? Like the door handle is on the very opposite side of the door of the hinges. Now, there are probably a lot of monetary reasons why that was the case, but from a biomechanical standpoint, it's a beautiful example of creating a really advantageous position from a large moment arm, because you're now applying a force, you're pulling on that door handle, and you're pulling at a really far distance from the axis of rotation or the hinges, and that then allows you to create a lot more torque with a smaller amount of force, right? And that's kind of the key of what we're trying to do, is we're trying to create these systems where we can create large amounts of torque, but it maybe doesn't always require us to do a lot of force. Or if we're really trying to get to be a fast player, or you're working with a fast player, those scenarios are big forces, big moment arms, and now we have this huge torque, and now we get these really fast rotational velocities where we can create a lot of rotational speed, a lot of rotational motion as a result of that torque.
So the hinges would represent basically as our human bodies would be the center of mass, right? So getting the center of pressure as farther away from the center of mass in the golf swing is super important to creating that torque.
This is a cool one from a biomechanical standpoint. The reason why is this, right? When you start to think about, again, we could say just a representation of center of mass, and again, I don't think we need to get so lost in the semantics, but again, if we think about how we shift, we start to think about, when we talk about this vertical axis that we're rotating around, right? That pole doesn't just stick right through the middle of us. It actually is going to kind of shift based on where that center of pressure is shifting. So what's really interesting about it, especially when we start to think about rotation, is as we start using those AP forces to create torque, what happens is as we start sending force towards the lead leg early in the downswing, what happens is we're shrinking the moment arm for the lead leg and its ability to produce that type of torque. And we're creating a larger moment arm for the trail leg, right? But we know that in the downswing, it is the lead leg that's the driver, right?
Yes.
Things get off the trail leg, it's the one that's producing it. So it creates a really kind of cool concept, because in that scenario, then what's happening is we get this really high anterior posterior force, or hopefully we do, from that lead leg. And even though the moment arm's small, we can create a really nice rotational torque that way. The other thing that's cool about the way torques work is that in biomechanics, we would term this what's called a force couple, which is the idea where these two feet actually aren't working in opposition of each other. They're working together. So they're pushing in opposite directions. And because they're on different sides of this axis of rotation, this ends up creating this really powerful rotation, one coming from a large force and a small moment arm, one coming from a smaller force and a large moment arm, and then summing up together.
Never really thought of it that way. That's so cool.
The example I think about it, if you've ever, most people have changed a tire, but if you've changed a tire with one of those like star ones, right? Like where there's handle, like you put something in the middle and you do a handle on each side, you can actually grab the one handle, that hand pushes down, you grab the other handle, that handle pushes up. And because you're on opposite ends of that axis of rotation or the lug nut, you get both of those things working in conjunction with each other. And so that's actually what our feet are doing.
Yeah, I know you've mentioned in some of your videos about with the AP force, how both feet need to be sort of doing the same work, where that graph crosses at the same time, as opposed to, like you say, you see some where the right foot's doing more than the left, or the left's doing more than the right, and that causes some issues.
Yeah, and I would say, here's what I'd say. I would say that's true for the timing of when those forces peak. We want the lead leg to do more in that anterior posterior direction.
Yeah, I agree.
And the reason why we want more of that is because this is why golf is so complex, right? We have to think of it in the 6 degrees of freedom. So it's not just, we can't just say, cool, yeah, we're creating this rotation with these anterior posterior forces. We are also creating force and motion linearly towards and away from the ball. And so because that trail leg is pushing away from the ball, again, that's the golfer's internal force, the reaction force pushes them towards the ball. The lead leg is going to push towards the ball to get a reaction force pointed away from the ball. Right. We want that overall linear force to be pointed away from the ball so that we can create the space to actually deliver the hands. And so again, I think it's just a cool biomechanical concept where like being able to shift pressure forward earlier and get it closer to the lead leg is a beautiful way to say, hey, this trail leg is going to apply less force because I want it to apply less force. Mm-hmm. It's still going to be able to create a lot of torque because of the moment arm, and the lead leg is going to generate a lot of force. And now we end up getting a position where we're not just like throwing the pelvis towards the ball, but we're creating that space and creating a lot of rotation. It's just kind of a cool principle versus, again, those players that maybe tend to send force too late to the lead side. Mm-hmm. And now what happens is now they actually don't have to be quite as active with the lead leg to get a big torque, because remember, the moment arm is related to that center of pressure, and so it's going to be shifted back more. And now they get this larger torque without getting a large force, and it gives them this idea that they're creating this beautiful rotational motion. And in reality, they might be creating okay rotational motion, but the linear motion that they're creating is just garbage.
Yeah. I love what you're describing there. Everybody out there is going to have to watch the YouTube version of this because this is awesome. But creating that room and space, right? It's like people that, our golfers that come to us say that they feel trapped. It's not a hands and arms problem or a club problem. It's usually their body's in the way, right? So forces are moving in the wrong direction, or they're moving in opposing directions to where they're not creating enough space to get that look. But ultimately, we just have to have room to deliver the club into the ball. I mean,
yeah,
simple as that.
For sure.
Yeah.
And I sometimes think too, like Jason, as at least I've interacted with players who've come in and done these assessments. Like we just, for whatever reason, we've become so obsessed with the vertical up and down. And the vertical up and down is great. Don't get me wrong. I'm a big fan of big vertical forces, right? Like let's create vertical forces. But I think if all we do, like we just went over some really key things that the trail leg does in addition to just pushing straight down, mm-hmm. that the lead leg does in addition to pushing straight down, we have to be able to do some of these other things. And I think that's something, Jason, where again is like my background is in exercise science. So I exercise physiology, training the body. Like remember, these ground reaction forces are coming as a result of the internal forces from our body. So from the muscles and our muscular capacity in the body. So when you start to think about what your lead leg can do, well, if you send it 210% vertical force, and again, this is going to be just rough numbers, but I think it exemplifies the point. If you send it 210% in vertical and you only have the capacity to maybe do 220% with that leg, that means you only have 10% to go around for an anterior posterior and a lateral. And so all of a sudden you've sacrificed some of these other key things in the name of just being able to push vertically. And so I think that's where we've got to figure out how these things balance together and helping them understand that it might be okay for my 210 to go to 190 if that means my AP can go from 10 or 12 all the way up to 30. That's going to create the space I'm looking for in the swing.
Yeah. So take us through, let's kind of like have some application here, right? If we had to like just have a golfer in front of us and say, what are, I mean, obviously everybody's different, but I mean, if we had some generalities of what we like to look for in the backswing, talk about the point of contact of the feet, the kinetic sequence, again, what Smart2Move measures, which I think is really, really good. And then how they transition into the lead side and because everybody's like, what creates rotation, right? I mean, we've talked about the lead foot, which I'm kind of fanatical about how that lead foot works and how it helps to go vertical and rotate. Can you kind of take us through what you would say is a good scenario of what you see in good players?
Yeah, for sure. So I would say when we start talking about kinetic sequences and where those forces should go, again, what we typically like to see, and I always like to, with that lateral force on the trail leg and that total lateral, that's the force we want to see peak first. Mm-hmm. We want to get that force peaking first because, again, it's the thing that's going to stop the back and help the forward. So I always say, like, where's a good place for that force to peak? Gosh, probably somewhere, ideally before you finish the backswing, around transition. If you're getting into the downswing where that force is peaking, I think you have a lot of issues.
Like P4.5 when it's like kind of coming out of the top.
Yeah. And I'm thinking like again, better players are going to peak that even earlier, right? We might see some players peaking that at P3, P3.5, those kind of positions. Okay. So I always, and what I generally see with golfers is that force is too late. So like, that's just, let's build that force earlier. Let's build it bigger. This is why I do a lot of drills with counter rotations where they have more time to build that force so they can start feeling that force building early. I know some people will probably, argue or think different things. I know every player might have some different places where they like to push on the ground. And what we have to do with where we're pushing on the feet, we have to create, I call it like or Smart2Move has it as a line of pressure, which is basically the idea of if you're always pushing in the exact same location on both feet and you have a perfectly square stance with no flare, nothing like that, all that happens is that line of pressure just simultaneously moves up and back in the feet. And you can't leverage the position of actually saying, hey, I'm going to create a center or a point of application in the trail side that is a little bit closer to the hill relative to where the lead is. And there's lots of ways we could do this, right? There's golfers I've seen that, if you've seen a golfer that's like, man, I feel a lot better when I can drop that trail leg a little bit.
Sure.
Right? Well, all they're really doing is saying, I like to push from the balls or the front of my feet. So in order to get that difference where the trail leg is a little bit further back and the lead leg is a little further forward or closer to the ball, further away from the ball, I'm just going to move my foot back.
It changes that line of...
Exactly. It changes the line of pressure.
Right, line of pressure.
That's the thing that's going to help them create the next force that's going to peak, which is that vertical torque, or that's that rotation that we see. And that's when we want to see peak kind of early in downswing, like arm 45 on the downswing is that next force to peak. And again, the players that can kind of leverage that line of pressure in conjunction with the AP forces are going to be ones that are going to create a lot of really good vertical torque. So I tend to end up, especially like just the younger players, and I don't know if it's because, and I hope we're getting players that are more multi-sport athletes. I think we know that's a good thing, right?
Yes.
But they tend to be athletes, like they're just a little more athletic, and they tend to stay in the balls of their feet a little bit more. And even if I can just move it just a little bit more to the middle of the foot, right, I'm going to be able to leverage that line of pressure and help them create this thing where they're going to go from here to here really quickly, where they go, trail foot's behind, lead foot's in front going through the ball, and now I can switch that really quickly on the downswing, and now I get this really cool kind of mechanical advantage to create that torque. Because
I'm so happy to hear that. We can agree that the toes are bad, right? So like a stable trail foot, like ball of the foot behind the ball of the foot is kind of what we're looking for.
You might have some, like, if I have a player who's really struggling creating any kind of torque in that direction, I might even pull them back a little bit more, right?
Yeah,
but I think
100%.
Ball to the middle on that trail side.
Yeah.
If you can leverage maybe some setup positions and look at some flare and look at some width to kind of create some things that way. I don't tend to see a lot of good things happen when those two pressures are just moving up and down with itself. Now, that being said, what we then have to do on the lead side is we for sure have to make sure that as we start to now, again, we peaked lateral somewhere around transition, a little before transition. We peak that vertical torque or that rotation kind of early in the downswing. Now we're setting up that vertical force, which is the last one in the sequence to peak. We want that force to come through the lead leg and travel through that ball of the lead foot.
There you
right?
go.
It's got to come through the ball of the lead foot because that's going to help us get the good AP directions as well simultaneously. And then obviously as it travels through, it's going to travel through the ball of the foot and then kind of migrate towards the back of the foot in good players. But like, again, a player I was working with the other day who just really struggled stopping rotations and starting the rotation towards, they tended to stay in the middle of that foot on the lead side, middle of the foot on the trail side. Their line of pressure is literally flat. They're not leveraging that point of application. So that's where that point of application becomes so important, I think, especially to that vertical torque or that rotation that a player would have. And so those tends to be the things I look at. If I'm saying, Jason, like I hate to say a catch-all, but if I were to say, like, man, what's a pretty decent catch-all for a lot of players, it's wake up what that trail leg does on the backswing, get it really active, creating a lot of force early, peaking it really nice and early, and then just making sure that we're staying more middle-ish of that foot, sending things through the ball of that lead foot, push hard and fire away, right?
Yeah. So let's talk about some drills, right? So that was perfect. Yeah. That was really, really good. So especially with the lead side, where the verticals kind of happen. I use the force pedal a lot. You guys use the force pedal, Zuback. I've seen a lot of videos you guys using that. Talk about some of the application drills that you guys use for, I guess, improving each force.
Yeah, so again, I love that like reverse step back. I think we see a lot of step forward. And to me, I would see that step forward as a little bit of an assistive, right? Like, let's just get momentum going forward. And I think, again, that's a great way to get a player feeling like I'm moving force forward early. But putting some motion in away from the target is a really powerful way to resist that and make them work really hard to not just fall off the ball, right? So I really have always loved that step back drill. You mentioned force pedals. I like literally like at my desk right here, like, you know, my force pedals sit here.
There you go.
I use them myself in the middle of the day when I'm standing up. I love them because sometimes just training a good point of application can work wonders for golfers. And I would say, especially if you're a coach that works with a junior golfer, like I feel like there would be nothing better. I don't know. I can say that because it's my own opinion.
Yeah,
right? So
okay.
I have this opinion, right? My opinion would be that as you start getting these junior golfers that are just getting into golf, teach them where to push on the feet, right?
Yeah.
Because if you can teach them where to push on the feet, I think that there's such a potential for them to do it in the right directions, do it in the right timing, create the right magnitudes. It's like, man, I would be throwing junior golfers on force pedals like crazy. So I love to leverage force pedals on that trail side, right? I'll throw one underneath kind of the inside middle of that foot where they have to really push down really, really hard to the inside and kind of create that eversion position in that trail ankle. Again, if they have the proper mobility, that's one that I really like. If you use that in conjunction with a force pedal under the ball of the lead foot, you know, that's a really great way to train those points of application. I think those things are really, really good. I tend to capture drills. So again, with the exercise science background, I like to test physical capacity and compare it to what they're doing on the force plates themselves to know if the drill should be like purely mechanical or physical or a hybrid of both, right?
Can you give us an example of that?
Yeah, so an example might be, again, a player I was working with, I measured her vertical jump, right? So
literally just standing
vertical jump, right? She had a standing vertical jump that was 22 inches. And you guys might be like, I don't know what 22 inches means. So here's what it means. The average on the PGA Tour is probably somewhere between 23 and 24. The LPGA Tour is probably somewhere between 16 and 20.
Okay, that's good information.
Jump 22 inches. Like she would sometimes send me box jump videos of her jumping like 48-inch box jumps, right? I'm like, there is a lot of vertical power here, right? And then you put them on the plates and you notice their vertical force is 140% of your body weight. So to put that in context, the threshold value in the Smart2Move plates is 165%. If you want to be a fast player, I think getting into the 185s up to 200 is really important. And so that's something I do a lot, Jason, where I've done a really simple task. I mean, heck, you could use a piece of tape in your teaching bay, have them put some tape up, jump up, put some new tape up, tape out a tape measure and say, hey, you jumped 12 inches. Well, if you jump 12 inches, it's probably okay that your vertical force is 140%.
Gotcha.
If you jump 22 inches,
you got some in the tank.
We got a ton in the tank.
Yeah.
And so that's where now kind of unlocking how they do these drills. So again, these are some great drills that I learned from Jason and some of my time with him down at TPI. So some of these like reverse golf jump drills where we've got like kind of hands up and we're trying to like let the legs drive the hands tends to be one. That's not a motion that most people are really comfortable with. Again, because when this player was doing all the box jumps, it's always arms down, hands down.
Yeah.
Arms up, hands up. I have thought it would be fun to do a study, and in fact, I've got a study in the spring that I'll probably throw this in. I'm going to be assessing vertical jumps on my force plates. I'll probably actually have them do like a no-hand jump, a swinging up hand jump, and a like driving hands down.
I love that.
Let the legs drive the hands and just kind of start to see what I see and that kind of data. So that's kind of one where then you're just trying to help them feel some of those vertical forces.
How did you unlock her verticals? Like, what did you do specifically to?
Yeah, so for her, it was a lot of force pedal under that lead side, right? A lot of force pedal under that lead side, just feeling that push.
When do you tell them to, or describe to them when you want them to push?
That's a great question. I try and tell them to push as early as they possibly can.
What if they make a backswing that's about waist high and they push and then they don't swing it back?
Honestly, most people, if they did that for a drill, they'd probably take a real swing and it might be okay, right?
Yeah.
Like, I want them to feel like I want a good vertical force to be peaking at like arm parallel on the downswing, right?
Yeah.
If our main goal is speed, even a little bit earlier. So she was, again, a player that like it was late, it was low. And so it's like, okay, let's get to some of these positions here, create this shift forward. And then with my foot under that force pedal, let's push really hard, get that leg to straighten, and then the arms come down. And what I actually did with her is I actually like stood behind her as she'd get in that position. And I would literally, like, as she gets here, I would just like hold her arms up.
Love that, yeah.
Because I'm like, she just had a tendency if she just wanted to throw arms and then push.
Yeah.
I'm like, no, I'm going to hold your arms right here. Because even when she would do the drills, like, she'd do the first 2 drills and the arm would stay high. And then all of a sudden, like 2 drills later and her arm's down here. I'm like, no. Like, let's keep arms up, push real hard with that. And then the other thing, interestingly enough, and this is something that I've talked to with some of my buddies, Ryan Robillard, who's up in Canada as well, great coach up there, good friend of mine. Him and I started talking about this concept of like, well, let's just jump fast, right? Let's jump fast. And so sometimes just that stimulus of, hey, let's do some of these jumping drills, let's do some of these drills, but let's worry about not jumping high, but jumping as fast as we possibly can.
Would that be in the impulse category?
Exactly, yeah. Because on the downswing, remember, the only way you're going to leverage impulse in the downswing is if you start applying that vertical force super early in the downswing. And in fact, that first study that I was talking to you about, the variable that I pulled that was the most highly correlated to club head speed was the lead leg vertical impulse between club, like where the club transition and changes direction, that's where I detected it, and club vertical in the downswing. If I measured the impulse between those 2 time periods, that was the variable that was just screamed club head speed.
Yeah, that's the gold right there of this entire conversation, right? I mean, it's like, I love that you said that because it's kind of confirming, like, I just wanted to make sure that I was teaching the correct timing of it. And I'm trying to get my good players really to feel like they're pushing on that ball before the club even reaches the top of the backswing.
Before it finishes back. Because
so happy to hear that.
When I pulled out, this is the thing, when I pulled out vertical force differences, so this was a group that gained about 6-7 miles per hour swing speed. And when I pulled out their vertical force differences, they went up 10-12%, which that's not bad. And their timing improved, for sure it did. But when I pulled out this impulse variable, again, between club transition and club vertical in the downswing, the difference was literally like, 30 to 40%.
Wow.
Right? Just these huge changes in that early force. I don't know if you've ever used, I forget what it's like an auditory feedback. We did it a lot in our, I did gait retraining in my PhD days. And sometimes we would put like a light dog shock collar on someone's ankle.
Oh, really?
And if they were producing force a way we didn't want them to, we would just like beep them, and they would just like feel a buzz or hear a beep.
Yeah.
I have seen some.
I've got one on my dog.
It looks things we might start doing with our golfers. But this one, it's like a disc, kind of like the force pedal, but it's hard and it basically clicks.
Oh yeah. I know exactly what you're talking about. Yep.
Right. Sometimes that auditory feedback, like you start telling that golfer, like, "Hey, I want to hear that click before your arms ever come down."
Yeah.
It's like, wait, what? Right?
Yeah.
Like, no way I'm producing speed at that point, or we're producing vertical force at that point. And you are if you're creating a lot of speed.
I like that. Yeah. Just another cue. So cool, man. So what else would you say about Smart2Move? I think we've covered pretty much everything. Got some good drills, got some application. Like I said, the timing is, I think, as important as, the force itself.
Yeah. Timing is, and just to further exemplify that, in the player this morning, we were getting him up in the 200% range with the vertical. It was happening at club impact.
Oh, wow.
Right? While he was getting faster with some of these laterals, it's like, hey, our end goal is going to be, we're going to try and shift this vertical clear to some of these points where we're getting a lot of vertical force early. then we can start to uncover that extra 4 or 5 miles an hour. So I think timing is really big. Again, I think you had mentioned this about kind of Smart2Move's model, and I think it's probably why I'm now doing what I'm doing with Smart2Move and why I'm enjoying it so much. There sure seem to be putting a lot into the education.
Yeah,
right?
I agree.
A lot of the, let's start to understand these forces, these impulses, these torques. Let's get this data. Let's learn how we can make these changes. Again, sometimes I think, and I've heard other like Greg Rose said this, at TPI, I've heard him say this a lot, just the power of the kinetics, the power of the ground reaction force. It's the immediacy of the feedback. Like, yes, I have a $200,000 motion capture system in my lab, and I've had the same conversation with Scott Lynn before, where him and I both say, like, that system turns on when we're doing research.
Right.
When we're doing hardcore research and want to look at everything, that system turns on. When a golfer comes into our lab and we have 45 minutes to spend with them to get them moving better, swinging faster, being more efficient, uncovering something that might help an injury, a club delivery, him and I both had the conversation. They're on the force plates.
Yeah.
And we're getting that data in real time. We're putting them through drills. We're putting them back on the force plates to make sure those drills work. And I think that's kind of that hard thing to do, where like we've got to just, and myself included, right? Like you've got to pull your head out of the sand a little bit and say, if that drill I've been using for 20 years to fix this thing is not fixing the thing that it is, maybe I need to look at some different ways to do things. And what it might be is that drill's just doing something that you didn't, I actually was using that drill to do this, and I see these things on the force traces. Not to mention, Jason, right? Every body's going to be a little bit different.
That's right.
And so I think that immediate feedback of we've uncovered a good progression for you, it's been incredibly fun for me to use kind of my passion of force with golf. And I'm new, right? I'm just feel like I'm scratching the surface and hope I can just keep doing this for another decade or two and find out more and more and more and hopefully help golfers get even better.
That's so cool, man. It's like you're doing incredible work, and I'm glad to finally connect with you. And me being involved in the company now, being a force plate owner, I hope that we can continue helping each other and build that relationship. So I can't thank you enough for your time. And before we close, I always ask one question. I got a lot of personal development questions, but I won't bore you with today. But one of them that everybody has to answer is, and this could be, it doesn't have to be any golf related. It could be personal, which I would actually prefer, is if you had a gigantic billboard and you had to get a message to billions of people around the world, you could put anything on it, a mantra, a quote, a saying, a picture. What would your billboard say and why?
Ooh, man, that is a great question. My billboard picture would for sure be me and my family, Jason. When I look at all of this fun stuff I get to do with forces and the travel I get to do and things like that, to me, it's all in the name of surrounding yourself with people you love and spending as much time as you can with them in those moments, right? Because those moments pass quickly. My thing would be, man, just soak up the moments with the people you love. So it'd be a picture of me with my wife and my 6 kids. That's how many kids I have. It would be, something related to just kind of embrace the chaos. Embrace the chaos.
With 6 kids, you've been through plenty of it. God bless you, man. Holy cow. I couldn't hardly handle my 2. So that's awesome.
I've got an incredible wife.
You have to have one, yes.
Incredible wife. So.
Good for you, man. All right, well, drop your information. How can people connect with you to say thank you for this unbelievable conversation and information that you're giving? And, how can they work with you, or how can they just, get involved with? Are you pretty big on social or just YouTube?
I'm a little bit big on social.
Okay, well, drop your handles.
Yeah, tstandy84 on Instagram and @TylerStandifird on Twitter. So those are great places to contact me.
I'll put those in the show notes in the intro as well so people can connect with you.
You can find me at UVU. Like my email there is just my name, tyler.standifird@uvu.edu. And to be honest, like the favorite part of this for me is connecting with coaches and learning from them. Because while I have a lot of years of biomechanics knowledge, I don't get to be with like 10, 12 players day in and day out in the trenches. So whether you're a Smart2Move owner or not, or just like ground reaction forces, There's nothing I enjoy more than getting an email in my inbox on a Monday morning that says, hey, Tyler, is there a time you can connect and talk a little bit about some things I'm seeing in a player, and I've got some ground reaction force data, or I don't. I would love to pick your brain about some things. So
that's awesome, man.
Like, I'd love to help and also learn from those coaches who are doing such great work in this field as well.
Well, I would love to work with you and do something together in the future. So let's see if we can make that happen.
Yeah, let's do it.
One last question I just thought of from an unnamed source is he texted me and said, I hear there are two Tylers at Smart2Move. One's the smart one and one's the dumb one. He said, ask you which one you thought you were.
Listen, I'll tell you what I know. I know I'm not the good-looking one.
That's awesome. So just funny. Having a little fun with you.
Yeah, that's fun. I will say this. It's funny, Jason. Tyler Watson, if you've interacted with him at all, man, that guy is a student of the game.
100%. Yeah, that's my guy. That's why, that's who it was. But he's been super helpful for me and a really, really brilliant guy as well. But
yeah, it's a fun team to be a part of. So I'll I'll take the smart Tyler. He'll take the good looking Tyler. We'll split it there.
I like that. Awesome, man. Well, thanks so much for your time again, and let me know if I can ever be of assistance to you. And when we get this out, I will send it to you so you can share it around. And awesome. Keep up the great work. And I really appreciate what you're doing for golf and for other coaches.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. Appreciate it. That was a lot of fun.
What's up, everybody? Guru back here again with a couple of things before you jump off. First, big thank you to Dr. Tyler for coming on the show and sharing his incredible insight on ground reaction forces and torques that I know will help you become better coaches and help your players. Make sure you follow him and Smart2Move on Instagram at Smart2Move and T Standy. That's TSTANDY for his personal Instagram page. And check out the Smart2Move YouTube page for some awesome educational content. Also, thank you again to our sponsors, Istruzi and Smart2Move Golf. Go to and get the Istruzi app and check it out, and make sure that you add the asterisk after your name so they know that you heard it from the show. And go out and check out the Smart2Move website at smart2move.com, and then also check out their educational content on their YouTube channel. You can also follow me and reach me on X or Instagram at Golf Guru TV. That's at Golf Guru TV. If you have a question or comment, you can email the show at golfgurushow@gmail.com or just hit me up on the DM. This episode was produced by Joel North. Thank you, Joel, for your continued excellent work. And the music was brought to you by Kevin MacLeod and Zach Mullett. Leave me an iTunes review or a rating, or on Spotify. Let me know how I'm doing. Always love that. And as I leave you with every show, the Jim Rohn mantra: study, practice, teach. Then make sure you pass it on. Thank you so much for listening. I'll talk to you next time.